On this week's video, we're continuing with part 2 of our 3-part series on QME safety. QME safety, and I hope you had a chance to view video number 1. I really want to encourage you to stay up with us throughout this series, because I believe that the topics that we're reviewing in this series are critical for each of us as qualified medical evaluators to have at the very tip of our consciousness as we go through our procedures in doing our evaluations. And on part 1 of this program, I discussed one of the most common areas where qualified medical evaluators can find themselves in hot water, and that is through the inappropriate use or even the deliberate misuse of the complexity factors associated with the higher billing levels of our QME reports, and I'm referring to the ML103 and ML104 levels of billing. So I really encourage you to go back and view and digest and ponder the ideas in that video, so that we can all move forward, and specifically so that you can move forward knowing that your billing procedures are proper and are correct and are appropriate for your case, and that therefore you don't have to worry that your report is going to come under scrutiny due to improper billing. Now, in part 2 and part 3 of this program, I want to talk to you about some of the other common areas where qualified medical evaluators can also encounter difficulty. Next week we're going to talk about ex parte communication. But for this week, I want to focus on the face-to-face evaluation with the injured worker. And many doctors are not aware, but during the face-to-face evaluation with the injured worker holds all the cards. The injured worker has the authority and has the backing behind them to pull the plug on the evaluation if for any reason they don't feel comfortable with you as the qualified medical evaluator. And if the injured worker aborts the evaluation for what is referred, and it's later determined that they had good cause to abort the evaluation, this could reflect poorly upon you as an evaluator and could bring scrutiny to you and to your methods and to your procedures, and could lead to an investigation, which is where we all want to not end up. We don't want any investigations about us, around us, involving us, okay? So it's critical that we maintain rapport with the examinee during the face-to-face evaluation, and that we conduct ourselves and we communicate properly to the injured worker during the face-to-face evaluation, so that we can arrive at the promised land. The promised land. What's the promised land? Well, the promised land is a completed evaluation where the examinee leaves the evaluation with no upset, no objection, or any problem, and the examinee is happy and comfortable with you as their evaluator, which is the type of feeling that we would all hope that the examinee would leave the examination with. So it's essential that we establish rapport early in the evaluation, and that we conduct ourselves in a way that makes the examinee confident in us and comfortable with us. And so the focus of today's discussion is going to revolve around Title 8 CCR 40, the so-called disclosure requirements. The disclosure requirements. And what I want to share with you during today's discussion is a method to communicate to the examinee during the face-to-face evaluation so that they can relax with you, so that their shoulders drop in your presence, so that their anxiety is lessened, and so that the examinee is comfortable with you as the qualified medical evaluator and continues with you throughout the evaluation to the finish line, which is a completed evaluation. So I have a fabulous procedure to share with you, and I want to go through Title 8 CCR 40 with you almost word for word. So I've included a live link on today's email, and if you'll simply double click that live link and print out the disclosure requirements, we can go through the disclosure requirements together and be on the same page as we go through it line item by line item. So I give you a minute now to go ahead and print out the disclosure requirements, and I look forward to being back with you in just a couple minutes as we continue with part 2 of our 3-part series on QME safety. CCR 40 right here with me, and I hope you have a copy of it with you as well, because it'll be important for you and I to be on the same page as we go through each of the sections of this regulation. And I want you to know that the procedure that I'm sharing with you in today's discussion is part of a larger discussion that I've talked about several times in other venues. And the main theme of today's presentation involves establishing a proper tone and a comfortable tone during the face-to-face examination. And so I've talked about establishing the tone of the QME examination in other blogs, discussions, and video posts. And if you're interested in this larger discussion, you can simply go to YouTube, type in my name, Perry Carpenter DC, in the search bar, and then scroll through the videos for the video entitled Establishing the Tone of the QME Examination. That video will review what we're going to talk about here in today's discussion, and will also expand upon several other topics that are critical to establishing rapport with your examinee. But for today's purposes, I'm going to assume that you've already met the examinee in the face-to-face evaluation, and you're beginning your evaluation procedures, and you're in the introductory phase of getting the evaluation going. And it's at this time that we want to integrate the following procedure that I want to share with you into your routine protocol. And I want to give you a little bit of background about the procedure that I'm going to share with you now. The procedure that I'm going to share with you now involves reviewing with the injured worker their rights as an examinee during the QME evaluation. And this comes directly from two sources. Number one is Labor Code 4062.3, and then secondly, Title 8 CCR 40, which I've referred to several times. And so several years ago, I was experimenting with different methods of introducing this material to the examinee. And I came up with the idea of preparing a written statement, and it looks like this. This is part of Labor Code 4062.3, and then the second paragraph, as you may see, the second half of the page, that's Title 8 CCR 40. So I prepared this written statement, and I started simply handing this written statement to the examinee prior to beginning the formal proceedings of the QME evaluation. Well, I wanted some authority on this procedure, so I submitted my idea and my procedure to the administrative director at the time, and this goes back about probably 6 to 8 years ago. Well, I described my procedure of going over the disclosure requirements with the examinee, with the administrative director, and she loved the procedure. She loved it. She thought it was a fabulous idea, and she gave me a total thumbs up, with one exception. With one exception. At the time, the prepared statement that I had also included at the bottom a place for the examinee to sign and to date, because I thought it would be important to have some documentation that indicated that, yes, indeed, I went through the procedure with the examinee, and to prove it, here's the examinee's signature with the appropriate date. I thought that that would be the best way to document compliance with this procedure. Well, the administrative director wrote me back and she said she loved the procedure. However, she said that she did not want me to require the examinee to sign and date the written statement, because she felt that the examinee might feel that proceeding forward with the evaluation was contingent upon them signing and dating the prepared statement, which in fact it's not. The examinee is not required to sign and date anything. So we simply modified the procedure to not require the examinee to sign or date the prepared statement, but we continued, with the administrative director's blessing, we continued to use the prepared statement procedure. And since that time, I've used the prepared statement procedure hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times to fabulous effect. To fabulous effect. And I want to share this procedure with you, and I want to encourage you to adopt this procedure in your routine protocol. Now, the purpose of this procedure is twofold. Number one, the purpose of this procedure is for you to comply, for you as the evaluator, to comply with your requirements. This procedure is actually required. It's required. And many doctors don't even know it, and many doctors that do know it do not do it. And it's actually required. So the first purpose of implementing this procedure is for you as the doctor to be able to comply with your requirements. Beyond that, the second reason to implement this procedure is because this is a fabulous procedure that helps to cement, well, I should say to first establish and then cement the relationship with you and the examinee. Many doctors do not know this, but the examinee has the authority to abort the exam and hit the ejector seat at any time. If they're not comfortable with you, they're out of there. They can get out of there. And they really don't have to explain a whole bunch except for demonstrating one of several different types of what is known as good cause. If they can demonstrate good cause, you're gone. We don't want that. Okay? So this procedure is a fabulous procedure for establishing and cementing the relationship during the face-to-face evaluation. And it seems to me that that was probably one of the intents of the legislature when they required this procedure to be done. That was probably one of their intents, maybe not their main intent, but a secondary intent of this procedure, or a secondary result or outcome of this procedure, is that it cements the relationship and it unifies you and the examinee forever, actually, not just during the duration of the face-to-face evaluation, but really forever. And you and I both know that many times we see these examinees over and over and over the course of months, years, and sometimes even decades. So this is a fabulous procedure, and possibly the legislature perhaps intended it to solve such an issue. Okay? So let's go over these disclosure requirements. And I hope you have your copy with me to follow along. Okay? So during the face-to-face evaluation, as I'm getting the room prepared and getting prepared for the injured worker, and as the injured worker is getting settled in, we begin our initial procedures. And one of the initial procedures is to have the injured worker read the prepared statement. Now, if the injured worker does not read English, the interpreter would then read the prepared statement to the injured worker. If the injured worker speaks English and there's no interpreter present, but perhaps the injured worker does not read, and you need to be sensitive for that, if they don't read, you would then read the prepared statement to them. In any event, what's important is that the injured worker understand and be able to reiterate each of the disclosure requirements. And the way you confirm their understanding is by reviewing it then with them after they've had an opportunity to read it, or after the interpreter has read it to them, or even in those cases where the injured worker does not read, after you have read it to them. So the point is, in every single case, you need to review this with them and confirm their understanding of each of the ideas and principles that are contained within the disclosure requirements. So you simply hand them the prepared statement, and the script might go something as follows. Mrs. Jones, I'm still preparing for you here, and while I'm getting ready for you, I have something here for you to read. Now what this is I have an entire page of rules and regulations that describe your rights as an injured worker during this evaluation. Okay? These are all your rights during the evaluation with me today. So I want to give you a moment to go ahead and read this page. If you have any questions at any time, just let me know. And then when you're done, we'll review each one of these one by one so that we are on the same page and that you fully understand your rights. Okay? Would that be okay? And they will say, that's okay. And they will read the prepared statement. So after they've read the prepared statement, you confirm their understanding of the codes and regulations by asking them, okay, Mrs. Jones, so tell me, what does the top portion of that statement, what does that mean to you? And you get them to reiterate their understanding. Now the top portion of the prepared statement is Labor Code 4062.3, which talks about prohibited and acceptable forms of communication. It's the ex parte communication rule. We're not going to focus on that so much today, except to illustrate how it coincides and is included as part of this overall procedure. So you'll work with them on that a little bit and make sure that they know that after today's evaluation, if there's something that they want you to know, that indeed you do want to know it. However, you're not able to take their phone call, that any subsequent communications with you would have to be in writing, and get their understanding that any subsequent communications have to be in writing. Okay? So that's the first half of this section. So now let's get into the disclosure requirements, CCR 40. And we're going to go through this painstakingly together. So you might say, okay, so Mrs. Jones, so tell me, what do you get out of the second half of that page? And this is where CCR 40 is contained. And they'll look down at it and they will give you their best understanding. And you'll work with them to make sure that they understand all of their rights. So let's go over CCR 40, and let me highlight the value and the power in doing this procedure exactly as it's written here in this regulation. Okay? So Title 8 CCR 40 Section A says, and follow along with me on your handout, it says, a QME shall advise an unrepresented injured worker prior to or at the time of the actual evaluation of the following, colon. Now, key point. It says that we shall advise the unrepresented injured worker prior to or at the time of the evaluation. Well, in this scenario that we're role-playing here today, we're at the evaluation. Now, some doctors do this prior to the evaluation in the form of sending the disclosure requirements in written form to the examinee as part of their intake materials. I prefer to do this during the face-to-face evaluation. It's so much more powerful. It's so much more rapport building. It's so much, to much greater effect, helps to establish the relationship between you and the injured worker when you simply sit face to face and communicate to them openly and honestly, and together talk about the rules and regulations that govern this procedure. It's an invaluable procedure, and it works to brilliant effect. So I recommend that you do it during the face-to-face evaluation, although the regulation says that it can be done even prior to the evaluation. The important point is that you do it at some point. Many doctors do not even do this at all. They don't do this at all. And it's required. It says a QME shall advise. Shall advise. It's required. The legislator demands that we do this. Okay? So here's what we're supposed to advise them of. Number one, that he or she is entitled to ask the QME, which is me, and the QME shall promptly answer questions about any matter concerning the evaluation process in which the QME and the injured worker, which is you, Mrs. Jones, are involved. So what that means, Mrs. Jones, is if at any time you have any questions, you just let me know, and I'll answer those questions to the best of my ability. Okay? And you get a head nod from them. Okay? Number two, that subject to section 41G, 41G we'll go over at another time. It's the very next section in the Codes of Regulation in Title 8. We're in section 40. So section 41G is the next section, which talks about the QME ethical requirements. But we'll simply mention it here as it's mentioned in section 40. It says that subject to section 41G, the injured worker may discontinue the evaluation based on good cause. Good cause. This is where the examinee first learns that they can discontinue the evaluation, that they have some power here, that they have some authority here, that they have some say here, that they don't have to be quite so anxious here, that they have some control here. This is where the examinee starts to become more comfortable with you because they realize that they have some control. They have some control over the proceedings. Now, good cause includes any of the following, and we're going to list out about 5, 8, or 10 different examples of reasons that the examinee can invoke in order to discontinue the evaluation. And you know what? They will have good authority to discontinue the evaluation if they can demonstrate one or more of these good causes. Okay, number 1. Discriminatory conduct by the evaluator towards the injured worker based on race, sex, national origin, religion, or sexual preference. Discriminatory conduct towards the injured worker based on basically anything. Here it says race, sex, national origin, religion, or sexual preference. If the examinee feels that you're discriminatory towards them in conduct, they can pull the plug. They can hit the ejector seat and they're out of there. And you're in trouble. So don't have discriminatory conduct. Conduct yourself in a non-discriminatory, open, objective, and neutral fashion. Number 2, abusive, hostile, or rude behavior, including behavior that clearly demonstrates a bias against injured workers. So if they feel that you're in any way abusive, hostile, you're rude, you got some kind of attitude, they don't have to put up with that. And when I review this with the injured worker, I say, Mrs. Jones, if at any time you feel that I'm abusive, that I'm rude, that I'm hostile, that I've got any kind of attitude at all, guess what? Guess what, Mrs. Jones? You don't have to put up with that. You can leave. Do you understand? And you get a head nod from them. Finally, good cause includes instances where the evaluator requests the worker to submit to an unnecessary exam or procedure. What that means, Mrs. Jones, is that today we're concerned with your shoulder. So we're not going to do anything unrelated or that's not related to your shoulder. We're simply going to be examining your shoulder. So, for example, that means you will not have to disrobe. You won't have to disrobe. Okay, you'll be able to keep all your clothes on. Now, in instances where you may have to examine sensitive body parts, this will be a good opportunity to gain a head nod from the examinee and to gain permission to expose parts of the body that may be considered sensitive. So, for example, that script may go as follows. So, Mrs. Jones, today our evaluation is going to be focused on your lumbar spine. During the course of today's evaluation, I will need to expose your lower back in order to inspect the lumbar spine. Would you be comfortable with that? Secondarily, the lumbar spine examination involves some examinations of the legs in order to check the function of the nerves as they go down into the legs. So I will ask you to expose your legs up to the thighs. Would you be comfortable with that? We will not expose any of the genitalia or any sensitive parts, so you can relax about that. But would you be comfortable with the thighs exposed? And you get a head nod from them, and they know that it's okay because they know that you're a doctor, and they know that you're discussing it with them in advance, and they know that you're giving them some control over the proceedings. I've never had an injured worker object on any basis once I clearly communicate with them their rights. Okay? So, let's just take a pause here and discuss that section. That was section 40, A1 and A2. Now, some doctors ask me, why would they want to go through this procedure and let the examinee know all the potential outpoints that the examinee can use to terminate the evaluation? The doctors ask me, isn't that just giving the examinee the fuel that they need to terminate the examination? And my answer to that is absolutely not. On the contrary. On the contrary, when you notify the examinee of all their potential outpoints and all the potential examples of good cause that they could invoke, and then you demonstrate to the examinee that you intend to comply exactly with these requirements, that you will not be rude, that you will not be abusive, that you will not be hostile, that you will not convey an attitude, that you will not make them disrobe unnecessarily, they are with you. They are with you. They're comfortable with you. They know that you're a guy that follows the rules, a guy that does this, or guy or gal, a person that does this by the books, and a person that has the injured worker's best interests at heart. Okay? So the contrary flip to this procedure is you absolutely want to go through this with them. And then you as the evaluator, once you lay these cards out on the table, you want to clearly demonstrate to the injured worker your attempt to comply with these requirements. In other words, you give them no opportunity to use any of these reasons to pull the plug on the evaluation. Okay? Okay, let's finish up with this section and bring today's program to a close. A couple more things. Section B says that if you are on probation, doctor, if you are on probation, you need to notify the examinee of that. And you need to give the examinee the opportunity to ask you questions about that, and you need to give the examinee the opportunity to decide if they want to proceed with you through the evaluation or if they want to perhaps get another evaluator. Now, being on probation, I've never been on probation with the Division of Workers' Compensation, but I can imagine that being on probation is a bit of a sensitive issue for doctors. And doctors may be apprehensive to disclose this to the injured worker for fear of losing the evaluation. And that's a justified fear, and I understand that. However, the requirement is, that you must do it. So that script might go as follows. Mrs. Jones, Section B says that if I am on probation with the Division of Workers' Compensation or any other licensing authority, I'm required to tell you about that. I'm required to give you the opportunity to ask any questions, and I'm required to give you the opportunity to either stick with me as your evaluator, or if you're not comfortable with me as your evaluator, I am supposed to give you the opportunity to elect to have a new evaluator. Now, I need to tell you that I am currently on probation with the Division of Workers' Compensation. Do you have any questions? And the examinee will probably be dumbfounded, but they may have questions, and you simply answer their questions. And then you would ask them, Mrs. Jones, are you comfortable to proceed with me throughout the evaluation today, or would you like to have a new evaluator? And you give them the opportunity to respond. Now, my suspicion is, like I said, I'm not on probation. I've never been on probation. But my suspicion is if that you communicate openly and honestly with the injured worker, and if you're honest about the terms and conditions of your probation, there's good likelihood that the examinee is going to be comfortable with you. For example, the examinee might say, why are you on probation? And answers could vary depending on the situation, but say, for example, you're on probation because you had some reports late. You said to the examinee, my last 2 reports, unfortunately, I had a change in office staff and all these reasons, and some of my reports came in 5 days after the deadline. The examinee may conclude, well, I'm comfortable with that. Sounds to me like you're a competent evaluator. You know all the situation. Are you going to be able to get my report in on time? Or something like that. I'm making this up. If you're on probation, you need to disclose it to them, work with them, and help them decide if they're comfortable with you or if they're not. Finally, Section C says, if the injured worker declines to ask a question relating to the evaluation procedure as set forth in Section 40A, which was one we talked about, which says you're supposed to answer all questions, and does not otherwise object on the grounds of good cause to the exam proceedings during the exam itself, the injured worker shall have no right to object to the QME comprehensive medical legal evaluation based on a violation of this section. Now, I can tell you, 100% of the examinees do not understand this regulation. You have to explain this one to 100% of them. So you might ask them, what does that mean to you? And they'll look at it and they'll say, if I don't ask any questions, then I don't know. That's what they'll say. Happens every single time. So it's your job to explain to them what this means. So what this means, Mrs. Jones, is that during the course of our meeting here today, if you have questions at any time, just let me know and I'll do my best to answer those questions, okay? Okay. Now, if you leave here today, if you leave today's evaluation and you're comfortable with me as the evaluator, you feel that I answered all your questions to the best of your satisfaction, you can't then later after I issue my report, you can't then object to me as your evaluator by saying that he was rude, he was hostile, he made me do an unnecessary exam. In other words, Mrs. Jones, if you have some objection to our procedure today, you need to declare it during the evaluation itself, because after the evaluation, the regulation says that you cannot declare it. Now, Mrs. Jones, why would that be? Why would they have this regulation? And this is where you explain to the examinee the philosophy of this regulation, and this is where your relationship becomes cemented for the present and the future. The examinee will say, I don't know, explain it to me. And you could simply say, and this is just sample script, you can feel free to come up with your own script, but this is a script that I've used that complies with this regulation. You could say, Mrs. Jones, you have an attorney on this case. So there's you, there's your attorney, there's the claims administrator, there's a defense attorney, there's all these people involved with this case. Now, I want you to know that when I issue my report, it's possible that one or more of these people may be unhappy with my conclusions. Can you imagine that, Mrs. Jones, that one or more of these people could be unhappy or upset with my conclusions? Could you see that happening? And Mrs. Jones will say, well, yeah, I could see that happening. And then you could say, well, Mrs. Jones, guess what? One of those people could be you. It could be you. When you read my report, you could be unhappy with one or more of the opinions or conclusions in my report. It's possible that one of them could be you. Now, Mrs. Jones, I want you to know that I'm simply doing my best with this evaluation. I'm going to examine you. I'm going to render the opinions and conclusions that I feel are the most appropriate in this case and that are the most accurate in this case. And I'm simply trying to do my best job. Do you understand that? So if you get my report later on and you're upset with any opinion or conclusion, you then don't have the opportunity to object. So if you're not comfortable with something during the evaluation, that's the time to object. Do you understand? And you get a head nod from them, and they're with you. They're with you, and they know that regardless of what happens, that you're a sincere evaluator, you're simply trying to do your best, you have a tough job to do, it's not possible to please all the parties all the time, and that even Mrs. Jones herself may have to swallow a bitter pill or two, but it's simply you doing your very best job. Can you see the power of this procedure? And the legislature gave us this procedure possibly with this in mind, possibly as a way to protect us as qualified medical evaluators, possibly as a way for us to have open and honest disclosure and communication with the injured worker during the face-to-face evaluation. They gave us this procedure so that we can use it to create an atmosphere where the examinee is comfortable with us, where they know that we're not going to pull punches, that we're not going to throw curveballs, that we have some rules that govern what we do, and that the very best evaluators like me, Mrs. Jones, we follow the rules to the letter. And you get a head nod from them, and you're now ready to proceed with the evaluation. Now, from here on, for the remainder of the evaluation, your job as a qualified medical evaluator is to comply with these requirements. Don't be rude. Don't be abusive. Don't be hostile. Don't have any attitude. Be neutral. Be open. Be honest. Be objective. Don't make them submit to any unnecessary exam. Explain everything. Work with them. Have rapport with them. Basically, this regulation is insisting that we maintain professional communication at all times during the face-to-face evaluation with our injured worker. So I encourage you to adopt this procedure in the face-to-face evaluation. As we mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, this procedure is required. So if you're not doing this procedure, you need to implement it immediately, simply to comply with your requirements. My suggestion to you is that you integrate it into your face-to-face evaluation, because it gives you the opportunity to have open and honest communication with your examinee. And you can never go wrong. You can never go wrong by insisting on more open, honest communication with your examinee. This is how you put the examinee at ease with you, at ease with the process, and at ease with your evaluation, and you prepare them in advance to be at ease with your opinions and conclusions once you generate your medical legal report. So doctors, this is part 2 of our 3-part series on QME safety. I look forward to being with you next week as we talk about ex parte communication and bring this final chapter of this program to a close. So it's my pleasure to be with you here today. This is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I look forward to being with you on future videos, especially next week. And for now, I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.